In a world where AI becomes quite powerful and the wealth in the world is dramatically increasing, I think that'll be a great world. There will be incredible new things to do. I think the abundance increase will lead to a better standard of living for all of us. But in a world like that, I think UBI is a great idea to explore. If AI is generating material abundance, I think that should belong to all of us. And if we can figure out how to distribute that.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe von Handelsblatt Disrupt, dem Podcast über neue Ideen, Disruption und die Zukunft der digitalen Welt. Mein Name ist Stephan Scheuer und ich begrüße Sie in Vertretung von unserem Chefredakteur Sebastian Mattes ganz herzlich aus San Francisco. Für mich ist es eine der verrücktesten Geschichten meiner Laufbahn als Journalist. Der Gründer von OpenAI und Erschaffer von ChatGPT, Sam Altman, will eine weltweite Kryptowährung schaffen. Dafür will er die Augen aller Menschen auf der Welt scannen lassen. Langfristig soll das die Grundlage für ein bedingungsloses Grundeinkommen werden. Denn als Chef von OpenAI glaubt er, dass eine Super-KI irgendwann viele unserer Jobs übernehmen wird. Und dann muss der Wohlstand neu verteilt werden. Damit nicht genug. Für das Projekt hat er den aus Bayern stammenden Physiker Alexander Blania als Partner gewonnen. Blania leitet die Firma hinter der Worldcoin genannten Digitalwährung. Der Augenscanner wurde in Erlangen entwickelt und wird auch in Deutschland produziert und heißt Orb. In dieser Ausgabe von Disrupt nehme ich Sie mit, zunächst zu einem Gespräch mit Alexander Blania, der die Grundzüge des Projektes und viele Details der Technologie erklärt. Anschließend folgt ein gemeinsames Interview, das ich mit Sam Altman und Alexander Blania führe und in dem es mehr um die Macht der KI und die Vision der beiden für unsere Welt der Zukunft geht. Auf geht's mit dem Interview mit Alexander Blania, CEO von Tools for Humanity, der Firma hinter dem Worldcoin.
Alex, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Alex, let's first just help us understand a little bit on how you actually got engaged with the product, the entire project and not only the product. So you have studied physics in Erlangen, you finished your bachelor, you started your master, and then you went to Caltech as like an exchange program, right?
Right. Well, so I started studying in Germany, in Erlangen, in the small and super nice Erlangen. And I studied both physics and industrial engineering in parallel. So like industrial engineering is mechanical engineering and like so some business stuff and physics. And then during my physics studies, I went deeper into theoretical physics. And then within the theoretical physics, I got into essentially how to use deep learning, so what people now call AI, to predict quantum systems. And I then did that research at the Max Planck Institute, also in Erlangen, which I just got super lucky because the professor was incredible. And then moved to Los Angeles to Caltech. And I actually was fairly on track to do my PhD there in theoretical physics. But then I got an email about Worldcoin from Sam, essentially, with a 2-page pitch of the project. And I drove to San Francisco and had an interview first with the other co-founder for a couple of times. And then at some point with Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, but back then mostly known for Y Combinator. So this is the very compressed version.
But this is a wild story. I mean, you've been studying physics and within physics, using neural networks to determine quantum systems, correct? So
that's correct.
This seems like a huge leap to start to, I don't know, roll out world currency. So why did you join the project?
Well, when I joined, I think Sam was working on the project for maybe like at maximum a year, but more likely like 6 months. So he first had the idea. He looked for co-founders. He found Max, which was the third co-founder, Max Nordenstern, who is like much more of a traditional finance background. He was at Bridgewater before and has, I think, did finance at Harvard before. And so the two of them started then working on the project and essentially wrote a very short white paper with a couple of ideas, like essentially like 3 big ideas. And the email I received was as a software engineer. So they started sending many emails to many people, I think, and I was just one of them because the IQAM at Caltech was or is known to be one of the best institutes in the United States for theoretical physics, and probably some of the AI people were aware of me. So I just somehow landed on that list and received that email, and then started the interview process. It was really just like an interview process many times with Max. And then Sam grilled me for 30 minutes for the first time. And then I started diving deeper. I had many other things I could have been doing. I was thinking about going into quantum computing back then also. So like many things were in my mind. It was really not clear. And the idea sounded super crazy back then. It was super early. Just a couple of crazy ideas. But then at some point, I sat down with Sam and Max and told them, look, like this is so early. You don't need a software engineer. If I join as a co-founder, and I just make sure that all the tech works and we figure out the technology. And that is then what I joined. I then brought on the founding team, which is actually a lot of people from also physics, a couple of people from Erlangen as well. And we started working on it. And then after a year or so, I became the CEO. That was like the short of it.
I have to say that the entire idea still sounds wild today. Maybe for our listeners, can you explain what is the core idea of Worldcoin, World ID?
Of course. So there's a couple things together. I will quickly start about the motivation, like why did we actually start working on this? And then I will talk about much more what it actually is concretely today and what I think it will be in the future. So when Sam pitched me a Worldcoin, it was a couple motivations. One is that back then he was already very convinced that AGI is going to happen. So artificial general intelligence is going to happen
so
within our lifetime.
So the supercomputer that can do everything a human can do, even more than that.
Correct. So a general intelligence system that can solve any problem you throw at it. So something like ChatGPT, but just much more advanced and much better. And so this was 3 years ago, right? Like 3 years ago, I think now if you say that sentence in a large group of people, everyone will like react pretty calmly, and it will not be a wild statement anymore. In fact, now is I think the normal debate that super intelligence is going to happen with our lifetime, and if it disrupts all of our society. But 3 years ago, it was very different.
We are actually doing our talk virtually. You are based in Berlin. I'm sitting in San Francisco. We see each other virtually, but I cannot be 100% sure that it's actually you. You could be the product of an algorithm, right? So I need proof to know you're actually a human and not a robot.
That is right. And I think that is the harder thing to imagine now, because we have seen static image generation. We did not see like video generation live. It's probably going to take another 12 months or 24 months. But what is a very easy to understand example is Elon and what he's doing with Twitter, right? Is unclear what his motivations actually are. Like if that is the only motivation, but at least he's stating publicly that look, bots on Twitter are such a big problem and we cannot distinguish them anymore from human users. And this problem is going to increase over the coming years. And so we just basically have to charge every user, because that financial transaction, what it does, it just increases the barrier for how easy it is to deploy bots. So anyways, so essentially, UBI will be necessary. Proving humanness on the internet will be necessary. This was like the AI part of the motivation. The other part of the motivation was that crypto is going to stay. It's there. 3 years ago, it was a very different. When we started the company, it was a very different moment in time. Back then, we were right after another crash, and everyone was just saying it's about Bitcoin and Ethereum, and nothing else will survive. But Sam's point back then was, look, the Facebook of crypto is probably not there yet, meaning in social media back then you had a couple companies that tried social media, but no one really succeeded.
Even though that I've been following this project for a while, I still find it absolutely crazy. So the first step is to say, we're living in a world where I don't know if I communicate digitally that is actually human. So I actually need to prove to a system, a digital system first, that I'm a human. Okay, this is already crazy.
Right.
So next step is, you say, in our lifetime, robots will be so capable that we don't have to work any longer. So we need to have something like a Grundeinkommen, universal basic income, to organize our society. And then we're actually getting to the next crazy step. You say, in order to do that, we need to scan the eyes of every human being. This is mind-boggling. So why do you need to scan the eyes? There are different ways, right? You could use a fingerprint. You could just use a web of trust. People who say, I can vouch that this is a human being. I don't need to scan the eye. Help me understand the rationale between the eye scanning.
Right. We so the first year we essentially spent just researching essentially that problem. It's like what people in the space call it proof of person node, but then another name, general for computer science, is Sybil resistance. So how do you make sure that basically one user in a network can only do a certain action once versus like 1,000 times like a bot would? And then if you look at it from a high level, you have three big options to approach that problem. You can use government identity systems, which is KYC. You just use your passport and log in somewhere. The second thing is all different kinds of biometric ways, right? Face, fingerprint, eye, DNA, like all of those things would be possible. And the last thing is what you just mentioned is trust networks, trust-based networks. And essentially we just build prototypes for all three, and we actually went pretty deep for all three. And the thing is with government identity systems, the Euro will be pretty fine, I think, broadly speaking. The United States probably as well, but there's just 50% for the world where this is not going to work because the government identity system itself is just not capable to solve these problems. So that's essentially why we walked away from this. We actually did not want to build a hardware device. We didn't even want to solve that problem specifically in the beginning. So KYC just fell through basic fundamentals. Web of trust, or kind of these trust-based systems, in theory, sound great. There's just no working implementation of that on scale, even in the large tech companies. So, for example, we talked to people in the Facebook team, and they actually tried to implement things like that with a lot of user data they have, but even they could not really figure it out. And it comes down to, without wanting to be too technical, you have to have a large number of trusted individuals that then can start verifying other people. So it's like, I know you, you know me, and so we can verify each other that we're real, and then we can start verifying 5 other people. But that just is nothing that has ever worked. And then also it has an inclusivity problem, because that again might work in San Francisco, but then bootstrapping something like this in other parts of the world, Latin America, is going to be really, really hard. And so we went to biometrics. And within biometrics, the first big thing that's important to understand is all the things that you usually use. So, for example, your iPhone, what that actually does is it just checks that you're the same person showing up again. So it does a one-to-one comparison. There's an embedding stored on your phone of how you look like. You try to log in again, and then you can use your phone. And that is fairly easy to do because it's really hard for me to look exactly like you. To solve this proof of person problem, so essentially everyone can prove to some network that they are in fact a unique human being. What we have to do is we have to compare one user against everyone else. So we have to do a one-to-N comparison. And that does not work with face because you just don't have enough information that you can take out of there. It does not work with fingerprint for the same reason. So essentially you would just, the system would collapse after tens of millions of people. You would not be able to distinguish people anymore. The only thing that actually works, and this works at scale, is at the iris, so the muscle of your eye. It has a lot of information in it. And so we realized that that's the only way to go. and then combine it with what is called zero-knowledge proofs. Essentially what that allows you to do is that you as a user, you remain completely private, and the only thing that you actually release to the network is that you're unique, and neither us or anyone else will know anything more than that. And so that then kind of was the powerful starting point. It took us 12 months to get there, and then we raised the Series A from Andreessen Horowitz, and then it actually became a company.
If I followed it correctly, it did cost more than 10 million to just produce the device that can do the eye scanning, right? So how much money did it cost, and how long did it take to produce it?
Honestly, we don't have an exact breakdown because it's a company with over 150 employees at this point. We don't have we have a department breakdown, but we don't have how much was R&D for the orb itself. But I think it was actually more than $30 million. It took a long time. We built everything down to the lens, essentially, because we believe that if this is needed, which we believe is the case, it needs to be very, very accurate, and it needs to be very, very secure. So meaning it's really hard to attack with, for example, I just show a computer display and you can fool the device, or you can show a 3D printed body, and all of those things it has to be able to detect, but also the hardware itself has to be very hard to attack. So we really designed kind of a 20 centimeter sphere called the orb from the ground up to do exactly that and manufacture it at scale.
I did that here in San Francisco. I hold the orb in my hands, and it's like a miniature Death Star from Star Wars, where you look into it, then you see a couple of lights blinking up, and you get a verification you're verified. It feels dystopian and fascinating at the same time. You mentioned that some of the other ways to identify yourself were cracked. One of the ways I'm thinking about is, for example, voice verification. That's something that a lot of companies here in the US are using, in Germany too. Now it's pretty easy to just copy my voice. What makes you sure that there will not be a way to crack your system in the foreseeable future?
So it really comes down to quite first principle reasoning, which is, so what is changing? What is changing that neither digital content nor intelligence is something that is purely human anymore, right? So anything that is purely playing in the digital world you will be able to fraud at a meaningful scale. So the only thing that really remains is you have to really, in some sense, measure and check what it really means to be a human being, which what the device is really doing. It has a thermal sensor, 3D time of flight sensor. So basically across the electromagnetic spectrum in many, many points, it checks, okay, is this real? And only if that is the case, so it does a lot of liveness checks, only if that is the case, then it images the user, the individual, and then calculates a unique code and then submits the zero-knowledge proof. So it just bridges to the real world without trusting a consumer phone, for example. It's just,
so it's also checking that I'm not dead, which is
yes.
a wild thing. So just take us through the process. So I'm holding it in my hand, I'm looking at it. What does the device do? Right.
So the first thing that actually happens is you download an app. You download an app, which is a non-custodial wallet. And then you want to verify. Usually you're probably not near a device, so you click on a map, you see where's the next device. Hopefully we are somewhere in your city. You go in front of that device and you say verify. Then a QR code pops up on your phone. You show that QR code to the orb, and then the verification process begins. What the orb then does is, first, it does a lot of liveness checks. So essentially you have a quite strong compute unit on the device, a GPU, with many neural networks in parallel that just check all different things. And so it checks, simply speaking, are you actually real? And are you not trying to fool the system in some way? But the cool thing is actually without anything like that leaving the device. So all of that happens locally. None of the data is actually leaving the device. And then it takes an image of the eye, which is, at that point, this is actually fairly standard, not in Germany, but like many other governments do this. It's not, and it's the same procedure. It's just, it takes an image of the eye in infrared, because otherwise with dark eyes, you would not see the pattern. And then a neural network on the device takes that picture, calculates a unique code out of this. So it just tries to compress the information in it, signs it, and that then gets compared to all other users. But then the cool thing is, if that uniqueness is correct, the user does a zero knowledge proof with that phone that you just start to verify that you are included in that set without revealing who you actually are. So meaning what your key actually is. So that means essentially you completely separate the user from the uniqueness check. The only thing that remains in the system is that you're unique. So you completely stay anonymous, which is counterintuitive because it sounds like, okay, there's biometric data involved, et cetera, et cetera. But it actually is much more, it is the most private thing you probably will use, much more so than Google login or Facebook or any of those things.
So it has the data of my eye, and what it transfers then back to the system is just a hash, right? Like a not compromised, like a condensed version, a compressed version.
Yes.
What I'm struggling with to fully grasp is is there a risk that somebody else might be able to use it? So I've been living in China, working in China for several years, and I checked. I can buy on Taobao Worldcoin logins only for pretty low amounts of money. So I would basically get the data to transfer it to my cloud, and I get the password. So is that like a scenario that you can prevent, or just help me to understand? Because if I lose my password somewhere, that's already bad. But if I lose something that's completely identifiable, such as my fingerprint, such as a picture of my eye, that's like infinite with the risks that I'm exposed to, right? So somebody might go through great length to get into the system, right?
Yeah. So there was like a couple questions here that come together, and I try to answer them one by one.
Yeah.
So the first thing is what you just mentioned of like people trying to buy Worldcoin logins is a result of we running a beta, and so people actually try to buy those logins because they hope at some point they will get a lot of money if they have those logins. But what is very important, this is actually not your biometric data or anything like that. It is essentially the wallet that you have used to verify yourself with. So in some, like simply speaking, you just give away a login. Like simply speaking, an email address and a password is the equivalent of that. However, what you will be able to do as that person, so let's say I verified in Portugal and I sold my login to someone in China because that person in China was willing to give me $20 and I didn't know what else I should do with it, then I will be able to just go back to an orb and basically just reset my account. And basically the person that has acquired it in China just paid $20 for nothing. So it's actually going to be, it is like, it's not the case that actually biometric data or something has been shipped around. So that is actually without any consequences. The only concern that I think remains, and it would be real, but it would require for Worldcoin to be massively successful, is you can, just how the system works, is you can tell someone, okay, sign up again, and then you understand that that person has already signed up, right? You understand, is that person a Worldcoin user, yes or no? And in some extreme scenarios where you have maybe like a government that absolutely does not want Worldcoin, or it's illegal to use Worldcoin for some reason, maybe because it's North Korea or China or something like that. That's, I think, actually the biggest worry, but there's not much we can do about that. And I think it's a very different worry than all the things that you just brought up.
So a couple of days ago was a really important day for you. You launched the protocol and you launched the coin. What does that actually mean? It really is the starting point of everything. So essentially, we built the MVP of the system, what we think is useful for
for both other platforms and consumers. And we actually are launching it this week, or we launch it this week. And so what this means is Worldcoin is three things at launch. It is a currency, a digital currency called Worldcoin. It is an identity protocol called World ID that essentially does two things. It makes it very easy for platforms to integrate World ID. So I, as a user, can log in with World ID into a platform while remaining anonymous, but verifying that I did not do a certain action on the platform before. And the third thing is World App, which is basically just the first app that connects to this protocol. So these are the three things that we launched, and I'm really, really proud that we got here, and I'm really excited for that week.
You already mentioned that you have a small team, a core team of about 150 people, but you want to roll it out globally, so you need people to actually use the orb. Maybe the first step, you're producing in Germany, right?
Yes.
And from Germany, you're shipping
globally.
How many orbs do you have at the moment, and how many are you producing? Like, how many do you need?
Right now, we have 250 live in the field that we used for this beta period. We have produced 2,000 of them that we will kind of roll out in the coming months. The back of the envelope calculation is that we will need around 50,000 of them for the system to be at full scale, which is going to take a couple of years. But that's the short of it. And yes, we manufacture in Germany. We did most of the hardware design and production in Germany.
Okay, so it's not your employees that will travel the world, at least not on a massive scale. You rather hire or basically give the orb to people to do the scanning for you, right? And they get rewards for doing it, right?
Yes, it's similar to Airbnb or Uber, where you actually have a decentralized model, or like also those scooter companies, right? Lime or Tier, where right now we produce the orbs. At some point there will be many more people producing those orbs. But then, for example, you can apply to operate one of those devices, and you get a reward with every sign up you make. And then this can be your full-time job, but you can do that next to your university, which we actually have many people that just like carry them around in a backpack after lectures or something. So you see like a wide range of people that do this, like super professional to people that just do this next to their studies.
We've already talked a little bit briefly about the role that Germany is playing. And I also found that quite fascinating. So you guys started in the US, in San Francisco, then the pandemic hit, you went to Germany and you couldn't come back. And in fact, now the largest part of the team is based in Erlangen just because of the pandemic, right? Did I understand that correctly?
At this point, the largest team is not anymore in Erlangen. It is in Berlin, actually. We like last year we opened up an office in Berlin, and right now I'm in Berlin. But yeah, how it happened, the story was pretty crazy. We started working in a company in San Francisco right before COVID. And back then it was 4 people. We met at Sam's place once a week. Otherwise, we were just sitting in an apartment and working. And then I was flying to Germany to interview hardware companies that can help us with the development of everything. And on the flight, Donald Trump announced that he's closing the border. And I just lost my student visa because I stopped my studies at Caltech. So I was sitting on the plane and knew I could not come back. And since I did my undergrad in Erlangen and I had still had an apartment there, we essentially just landed in Erlangen. And then as the company started growing and the pandemic kept on going long and longer, we basically just flew everyone to Erlangen, and we rented this huge office space in Erlangen and apartments and houses around it, and had people from MIT, from Stanford, from all of those like US places. They flew to Erlangen and lived in Erlangen for 2 years essentially to build this company, which was a pretty surreal experience for everyone because all of those people came from like really large cities, and we ended up not even in Erlangen itself, but in Tennenlohe, which is like even smaller outside of Erlangen. So it was a pretty funny experience.
Erlangen of all places.
Yes.
It's only just one more wild twist in this entire story. Yes. So how's the team distributed at the moment? So how many people are in San Francisco or in the US, and how many are in Berlin or Erlangen?
So, I mean, given the company grew very rapidly, mostly during COVID, it is fairly distributed, because I think half of the people were kind of young and crazy enough to move somewhere during COVID and didn't have a family or something, could just do that, while the other half were sitting somewhere else in Europe or somewhere else in the United States. So we have a huge remote part of the company. And we come together in Berlin once a month, pretty much as the whole company. So like everyone is flying from all over the world, and we're going to meet in Berlin. So let's say 50% of the company is in office. The majority of that is in Berlin. Maybe 20-30% of that is in San Francisco, and the rest is remote over both Germany and the US.
So you have the team, you produce the orbs, you send the orbs around the world, and then people get a grant for scanning others. This can open the risks for abuse, right? There was, for example, the MIT Technology Review that talked to a couple of people in several different countries, such as Indonesia, Kenya, Sudan, where they claimed that people who were actually wanting the grant to scan others, they tricked some of those people into getting scanned by telling them wrongful stories. If you scale with 150 people on like a global scale, how can you prevent those things from happening? As there is a financial incentive in scanning other people's eyeballs.
Well, there's a couple of things here, right? So first, the things you just mentioned, obviously this shouldn't be an excuse. But this was like when the company was pre-Series A, it was like 12 people, and we tested prototypes during the pandemic. So obviously back then we could not even travel to many places, but actually most of the signers back then were in Sweden and Norway. But there's fairly straightforward Q&A processes of just like super strict quality controls that you do frequently, and you just fish the bad actors fairly frequently. And of course, this will never be perfect, especially if you want to get to the billion people scale, as well as things go wrong with Airbnbs and things go wrong with Ubers at times. But of course, I think it will be pretty stable and it will scale really quickly. That's the most important thing. And then the downside is also pretty minimal, because if as a user, let's say, you did not understand entirely what happens to you in that moment, let's go to the worst case. You can always completely delete your sign up. You can, if you lost your account, you can just reclaim it. So essentially, there's no downside for you as a user in that sense.
But it feels a little bit as if somebody would be stealing my passport, right? Because I can prove humanhood with it. I can link it with other services. That's like the longer term goal, right?
Well, but you can reclaim it. I think the analogy is actually, it's also a terrible analogy, because on your passport, you have your name and a lot of other information, versus on that, there's actually no information on it. So it's fully anonymous. It basically is one statement, okay, of this is a unique human being, and you can use that to verify on different online services. And let's say you have lost it somewhere and then someone uses that, you can just go back and re-enroll and just basically deprecate that old login and get a new one. So it's just not at all like losing your passport.
Mm-hmm. You're rolling it out globally, but even though the company was founded here in the US in Silicon Valley, it's not available to the US, at least not the grants. Mm-hmm. Why?
Well, in short, I think you're very aware of this, but in the United States, more than anywhere else, there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty right now. So you have like a huge tension within the country, even like what are the rules, what can you do, what can you not do, which is very different in Europe and in Great Britain and in many other places where you have pretty straightforward and easy to follow rules. So we just stay out of the United States, and the protocol just stays out of the United States until that is resolved, which hopefully doesn't take that long anymore now.
Here in the US, a couple of famous stories, also famous scandals, have shaped the perception of the crypto industry, namely with Sam Bankman-Fried and the collapse of FTX. He has also been an early investor in your project. How did that impact you? Everything that happened in and around Sam Bankman-Fried.
Well, so him investing did not impact us at all in that sense, right? Because it was a super small check, super early on, which I think he pretty much invested in every crypto project, because before no one knew he was a fraud and he was a pretty famous guy. And so like people were actually back then quite happy to have them on their cap table. Of course, if I would go back, I would not do that. That's for sure. But he was not at all in a meaningful position. Had a very small check, like a small angel check, basically in the Series A. How it impacted us, of course, is very meaningful, because I think he disrupted the trust in the entire industry and, of course, harmed a lot of people with that. And that was very, very meaningful. Like the whole sentiment around crypto, we now work on this since 3 years, and essentially we went like to 2 waves. And when we started, everyone was like, okay, crypto, no one needs it. Like, what are you working on? No one wanted to invest. Then we had this like huge hype cycle where everyone was just talking about crypto and it was like the hot new thing. And then FTX collapsed and no one wanted to talk about crypto anymore. And I think now we're swinging back again. So it's like, it's a constant swing, which makes it obviously very hard, to do many things like fundraising. But, I think that's how it impacted us.
Fundraising is an interesting topic. You recently closed another round. You raised $115 million with a few people in the VC industry that I talked to. They were quite fascinated that the round was so successful, given the overall sentiment in the crypto field.
Yep.
But if I got it correctly, it was a down run regarding your valuation, right? Last year you stood at 3.2 billion. With this round, it was 2.3, if I got the data from PitchBook correct. Is that correct?
Both numbers are actually wrong.
Okay.
We actually never announced that, and I will also not announce it now. Well, I think that is public information that we released. So the company has raised 3 rounds so far. So the first year was completely funded by Sam Altman. Then we raised the Series A, which was I think in total 25, maybe a little bit more, 26, 27, $20 million, with Andreessen Horowitz leading the round. And then we raised a Series B last year with, again, Andreessen Horowitz and Vinod Khosla from Khosla Ventures in the lead, which was $100 million. And then we raised another $115 million in January this year. So round about $250 million.
Looking at you from like a pure startup point of view, I would just think, okay, maybe there's going to be an IPO. But looking at you regarding the topics and the areas that you're targeting, you're so close to stuff that normally governments do. So comparing your approach to what other companies have tried to build, I'm specifically thinking about Meta's Libra. How can you avoid falling into the same pitholes that Meta did, fighting with governments because they say giving out currencies is a core function of a government and not of a stock market listed company or a startup?
Right. So there's a couple of things here, right? Because you have identity, you have financial services, and the answer on identity is very simple. Everything we do is open sourced, and like the whole point is that it actually is not a company and it does not behave like a company. So that means that eventually even governments will just be able to use that, and so it really is like a very fundamental piece of technology that I think and hope we will need in the coming years and decades. Something like Ethereum, how Vitalik came up with the idea, but many other people built on top of that, right? To your comparison with Libra, it was a completely different beast, right? Because I think the Facebook had a very bad standing back then already for a lot of different reasons, and they actually have chosen a path that in retrospect they would have not chosen again in how to approach crypto, right? So I think the much better question is any crypto company that issues a token close to governments? And the obvious answer is no, it's not, right? Because it is a digital currency. That is correct, because it fulfills some of those prongs that you would judge something from, but it actually fulfills a very different reason.
What makes you so confident that there will not be big road bumps? Because, I mean, you're not only thinking about a currency, as you just pointed out to, you're also issuing something that's close to a digital ID, right? And this is another core function of a government. Why shouldn't government step in and say, you're not allowed to do that?
Well, I did not say I do not worry about major roadblocks. We already have quite some major roadblocks behind us, and I'm sure we have many other big ones ahead of us. And it's really hard for me to tell you what this is going to be. I think the government ID related thing, kind of analogy that you just brought up, I think does not really hold, because we actually do not do what a government does. A government has a database of your name and your social security number and your tax number and your address and all those things. And Worldcoin is the exact opposite of that. It actually is, it can come together. So I think, for example, what Europe is doing is quite forward thinking. Europe has an identity passport coming up and in development. And I think in the next 3-4 years, it's going to happen. And World ID would be something that is complementary to that. So it would just integrate there, and it fulfills a different function. You will use it for different things. If you will actually need to use a government ID, you will do that. So it's a very different beast.
I don't know. From my perspective, it's very tricky, because I can change my name, but I cannot change the way that my iris looks. So the kind of data you collect is quite sensitive. You pointed to the open source approach. As somebody who has worked in North Korea and China, etc., I was quite fascinated, but also scared to see that anybody could just download the GitHub code for the orb and reproduce maybe not the entire thing, but parts of it. So aren't you giving out something that can be very dangerous in the wrong hands?
Well, we believe very much so, because it's going to be very, very important that everyone can verify what this technology does, especially if it becomes somewhat meaningful in our daily lives. So that is by far the highest priority. The orb itself, it's open source, but actually the license is pretty strict to exclude all of those scenarios. So if you can actually read the license, it excludes all kinds of use cases that would go against a human's dignity or anything in that regard. So yes, my short answer is definitely something like that should be open sourced.
Alex,
and I mean, you can buy iris scanners today, right? It's not a weapon system. It is a very good biometric scanner, that's for sure. But it is, transparency is more important than anything else here. So it is a very, very dangerous technology that can be used for all kinds of things, all kinds of great things and all kinds of bad things. World ID is essentially built to become a public utility at some point. That was the whole idea. The misuse is very, very limited. It's actually hard to think other use cases for which you could use this technology.
Okay, that has been super, super interesting. At this point, thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much, Stephan.
Alexander Blania ist nur eine Person hinter dem Projekt. Der ursprüngliche Vordenker war Sam Altman. Mit beiden spreche ich darüber, wie das Projekt mit ChatGPT zusammenhängt und warum gerade Tech-Gründer ein bedingungsloses Grundeinkommen fordern.
So you guys have been working on Worldcoin for more than 3 years. Now you had the launch date, but what does that actually mean? Where do you stand in the development of the project?
Well, in short, it means we have built an MVP version of what we hope is widely useful to people. And what specifically that means is we have built 3 things. It is a an identity protocol called World ID that lets you verify yourself anonymously on the internet. It is a digital currency called Worldcoin that launched on Monday. And it is a non-custodial wallet called World App, which really is just the first app that lets you log into the protocol. But what is so exciting about this is that we think it will grow very, very quickly and hopefully will get this technology into many more people's hands than crypto has done so far.
Sam, do you want to add to that, or shall I continue?
He really nailed it. I don't have much to add.
Okay, help me understand the broad concept. You talk about building a new identity and financial framework, but what does that actually mean?
I will try to condense it in the spirit of time, since we don't have much here. But essentially, one of the major problems across computer science, and I think the internet more broadly speaking, is the problem of Sybil resistance, or in crypto people call it proof of personhood. And why that is very important is just really simply speaking that you as a user of a network or the internet, you can prove to the internet that you're a unique human being. And something like this just does not exist right now. And as trivial as it sounds, it really is the building block for 1,000 different things, because you can build identity on top of that, or you can align incentives around a certain goal, for example, to grow a network to all of humanity and make sure that every human being just has one share in it. So this is a really, really hard problem. And we spend a lot of time and money into solving the problem with a hardware device we call the orb. It's a 20 centimeter sphere that basically uses biometrics and what is called zero knowledge proofs to issue those proof of personhoods to people, to really everyone. You just have to show up and 20 seconds later you have it. And then you can use it online and stay anonymous doing so. Why we think that part specifically matters is, well, one, it already matters today. Many things in crypto depend on that. Many things across the internet actually would depend on that. But it will be increasingly important in a world in which digital content and intelligence will be nothing purely human anymore, right? It will be really hard to judge on the internet what you actually interact with is humanly created. And originally, why we have built this is that we can launch a digital currency and give ownership in it to everyone and make sure that bad actors don't claim too much of that, simply speaking. And why that is so powerful and so important, we believe, is that it aligns incentives around the growth of the network, which is something we have never seen.
In your founder's letter, you also pointed towards a potential path towards an AI-funded universal basic income. Maybe this question to Sam. How do we get there, and what does AI-founded universal basic income mean in that context?
Well, I think we're still a very long way away from that. But in a world where AI becomes quite powerful and the wealth in the world is dramatically increasing, I think that'll be a great world. There will be incredible new things to do. I think the abundance increase will lead to a better standard of living for all of us. But in a world like that, I think UBI is a great idea to explore. If AI is generating material abundance, I think that should belong to all of us. And if we can figure out how to distribute that well, I think it'll be sort of an inclusive prosperity boom where people will be able to sort of do whatever they want and have these amazing new tools and the wealth they need to create and live the life they want. So I don't think that UBI is an entire solution, of course. I think there's a lot of other reasons to work and that people want to create and add value back into sort of our shared society and get the fulfillment and enjoyment from doing so. But I do think work of the future will evolve, and that as the socioeconomic contract in the world evolves, UBI is a part of it that's worth studying. And an idea like this, to do it globally, I think is quite intriguing.
You are also the founder and the CEO of OpenAI. How are OpenAI and Worldcoin related?
No official relationship, but I would say like part of the same spiritual mission or something.
When I first looked into Worldcoin last year, it was one of those fascinating ideas, also scary ideas. But at the time, this entire notion of proving personhood seemed odd. Now, especially because of OpenAI, it makes a lot of sense because I don't know that I'm talking to a human being, right. Even now, us talking here. So is Worldcoin solving a problem that OpenAI created?
I don't view it that way, although I understand why you would say that. I sort of view all of these things as just like pushing towards the future. And there's going to be many elements of that altogether. And these are things that I think are independently important to the future, not sort of one solving a problem the other's created, but they do all like fit some specific vision of the future.
A question for you, Alex. Why do I need to scan the eyes? Because I find this incredibly scary because this is very sensitive data. I met your colleagues here in San Francisco. You explored many different ways of doing that. Why isn't there any other way to prove that I'm really a human being?
First of all, we do not want to have your data. We don't want to do anything with your data. Essentially, we really just want to calculate locally on the device that we use for sign up. We want to calculate a uniqueness check, essentially. And then we do all kinds of other things around that. So you actually stay completely anonymous. So that's the first piece. But to your question, all the things that you usually use, your iPhone or actually Face ID, I think is a great example. It does a one-to-one comparison. So it just checks that you're the same person, again, logging into your device, which is fairly straightforward to do because it's really, really hard for me to look exactly like you. To check uniqueness on a global scale, you actually need much, much more information. And in short, face cannot do that. Fingerprints cannot do that. And the eye actually can do that. Like the muscle of your eye has a lot of information in it. And that's, for example, why governments do that also on a large scale. Some of them at least do, because you can actually reliably distinguish all of us on a multi-billion people scale. And this was really important to us. We really built this for the world. We built this to go to billions of people eventually.
I think this really is an amazing technical accomplishment that the Worldcoin team did. Like Alex, I think, downplayed it too much there.
Why?
It's such a hard problem to do this at the scale of the world and with a acceptable degree of accuracy is such a hard problem. People have thought about this in many ways for a long period of time, but this is a solution.
When looking at OpenAI, you made the statement that making everything open source would be a risk if it gets into the hands of bad actors. With Worldcoin, you're following the completely opposite path. So looking at the orb, a lot of the information about how to build it is open source. How do you prevent that from getting into the wrong hands? I'm asking as a journalist who has worked in China for many years, who has been to North Korea. So it's pretty easy to use this technology also in a very bad sense.
I'll let Alex talk more about that for Worldcoin. But for OpenAI, we do open source a lot of stuff, and we'll open source more stuff in the future. It's you try to look at each individual decision and the risk reward trade-off there, and make the best decision you can. But it's not like a sort of black and white issue across the board.
For Worldcoin specifically, we thought about it. We thought about it actually quite extensively. But I think the first important piece of this is what we're building cannot be a company. So when we talk again in 5 years, I hope that Sam and I do not have any say into this other than maybe just kind of social signaling. But it really has to decentralize. It has to be controlled by the world, and it has to be in the hands of the world, because this really is, we hope, very important infrastructure. And for that to happen, one of the major things is really just building and working transparently and sharing everything with the world and asking for feedback. And then also in the future, let other people build those devices. And of course you can think of bad scenarios here. Essentially, we have built a very capable device and other people now have those plans. But I think the upside outweighs the downside massively here.
So how does it work economically? How are you going to make money? There have been quite a few investors. Sam, you personally invested in it. What's the goal there?
Well, if you go to if you go to, I don't know, Worldcoin has 1 billion users, or let's even say 100 million users. I think it's very evident that there's a lot of value in this, in many different ways, right? Just the crypto network itself, identity verification on that scale, something like this just does not exist today, and I think will be very transformative. So in that scenario, what you usually do as a decentralized protocol is you try to capture fees in many different ways to sustain the network. That's what people say. So Ethereum, for example, does that very successfully. And I think that's what hopefully will happen here too. Until then, we will be funded by investors that usually understand such a notion quite well, because social networks, large social networks went through a similar cycle where they actually just had to reach a certain scale until they can monetize.
So what's the next step then? As a startup, you could IPO. Sam, you're an investor. How do you look at the company from an investor's perspective?
The investors become token holders here, and we're all just sort of along for the ride with the rest of the network.
You are launching it in Germany. Alex, you are based in Berlin at the moment. Though the company was started in the US, it's not going to be available in the US, at least not for the token part. Sam, you have been critical towards regulation in the US. Why not starting it in the US? I didn't fully grasp that yet.
We don't think we can. I mean, it's, of course, we're going to respect and follow the laws of the US and the sort of regulatory guidance. And I think it's a shame, but given how we understand it, we can't, we just can't do it. You know, we hope it'll evolve over time.
Do you think this is going to change in the foreseeable future, or will it just not be available in the US?
I hope, but that's a better question for the regulators. I don't know what they'll do.
How do you convince people to actually now scan their eyes? I mean, you're globally scaling it up, and this is something that's very sensitive. So how are you going to actually do it with just such a small team of 150 people?
Many people seem very excited to do it, and some people won't, and that's of course fine too. But the sort of the cool thing about a network like this is the network can provide incentives. And so it's not like the 150 people at Worldcoin that have to go do this. It'll be all of the orb operators that will decide this is a cool thing to go do.
You have been quite transparent when it comes to the orb and the technology. What I found surprising is that the nonprofit itself is located in the Cayman Islands, that has a very lax privacy framework for companies operating there. That's a question for the both of you, Sam and Alex. Why the Caymans, and how do you build trust there?
Well, so first of all, we are actually, data protection is done with Bavaria. So we are actually enforced by the DPO in Bavaria, which I think is one of the strictest ones there is globally. And why Caymans? It really is just the standard that people have chosen for large crypto projects. And the reason for that is actually that you can decentralize it and you can decentralize the governance. So I hope, and I think this is something that will become much more normal globally at some point. But right now what the Cayman allows you to do, it allows to give the governance over such an important project to its users. And that's what we really want to do quite quickly. That's the only reason.
As last question, that may be to you, Sam. A lot of people have tried to have those crypto projects, and most of them have failed on a global scale, at least of that size. What makes you confident that this one can actually succeed?
Well, I would never say confident. Like with any project, you start and you work really hard and you do the best you can. I feel very excited about the position the project is in and the incredible work the company has done, but there's a ton of work in front of us, and these things are impossible to predict in advance.
Alex, Sam, that has been very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Und damit sind wir auch schon am Ende von Handelsblatt Disrupt. Wie immer freuen wir uns über Kommentare in der Handelsblatt Disrupt LinkedIn-Gruppe. Sie können mir natürlich auch eine E-Mail schicken. Details finden Sie in den Shownotes. Danke an dieser Stelle auch für die Unterstützung von Regina Körner und Migo Fecke von Professional Podcasts, dem Dienstleister für Strategieberatung und Podcastproduktion. Und ganz zum Schluss bleibt mir noch zu erwähnen, dass wir ein besonderes Sommerangebot für Sie haben. Statt 4 Wochen können Sie jetzt 6 Wochen lang das digitale Handelsblatt für nur €1 lesen. Unter allen Handelsblatt-Probeabonnentinnen und Abonnenten verlosen wir außerdem 10 Amazon-Gutscheine im Wert von je €500. Besuchen Sie doch dazu die Internetseite www.handelsblatt.com/sommer-special und werden Sie Teil unserer großen Handelsblatt-Community. Wir freuen uns auf Sie und melden uns nächste Woche Freitag wieder. Bis dahin wünsche ich Ihnen schöne Sommertage und eine informative Zeit. Ihr Stephan Scheuer.